Well, guys, I want to start by saying a big happy Father's Day to all you dads in the room and all you dads who are watching or listening online. Because dads, you are incredibly important in the lives of your sons and daughters, in their security, in their wisdom, in their future. I mean, your job as a dad is a really, really difficult and an important job. So on behalf of Northpoint, on behalf of myself, I just want to say to every dad, happy Father's Day. And guys, I also know that today can represent a day of a lot of emotion. I think that's just the reality. And there's a lot of emotion with our experiences with our dads, you know, some good, not so good, some seasons, kind of where our dads are at. And I just think that's important to acknowledge today. And I want you to know, before service today, I mean, I was praying for you. And I was just asking for God to meet you and for God to comfort you exactly where you're at. And guys, I think the reason why we feel the emotion we do when it comes to fathers is simply another reflection point to say, dads, you're so incredibly important. So happy Father's Day. Well, guys, today, as I was thinking about dads and I was thinking about, you know, fathers and the whole thing, you know, I thought, you know, what are we going to talk about? What direction should we go? And I thought to myself, this would be kind of a fun way to start. And I want to introduce this to you guys. And I just have a question for you. Do you know what this thing is right here? Does anybody know? A what? Distributor. Look at that. That's impressive. Yeah, now this is a car part. This comes from a 1969 Ford Mustang. And if you were here a few weeks ago, I explained, you know, how the Ford Mustang came into our family. You know, my oldest son, Sam, drives a 69 Ford Mustang. I drove a 67 Ford Mustang, but I no longer drive it. It's a very sad story. I don't want to go there. So anyways, but this comes from a 69 Ford Mustang. And if you ask me what this was like 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, I would have probably looked at you and said, I think it's like a flux capacitor. It's, you know, garbage disposal thing. I have no idea. I would have no clue. But as a result of, you know, my son getting an older car, classic cars, you know, I've been on YouTube. I've learned a ton about cars. I've learned about, you know, exhaust systems. I've learned about a thing called a harmonic balancer, which like keeps the whole engine balanced. I've learned about water pumps and head gaskets and all these things. Like I'd never known this my whole life. And then I learned about a distributor, but I learned about this a little bit in a hard way. Because about 1.5 years ago, Sam and I were actually kind of tearing down his engine and rebuilding it based all on YouTube again. And so we tore the whole thing down. There's like this big chunk of metal, you know, that I think they call it the block. And so we're looking at this block, and now we're rebuilding the engine and putting all the things on, and, you know, the hydraulic lifters and, you know, all the stuff and the water pump. And one of the last things you put on is this thing, a distributor. And there's like a hole on the top of the engine. And so I put this thing in, and it's not going in. So I jam it and jam it and jam it, and it's still not going in. Then I turn this little thing on the top, which is called a rotor, and finally it fit in. And I was like, awesome, you know, perfect. So I put the spark plug wires in, you know, do all that good stuff. And then I say, Sam, get in the car. You ready? Now fire it up. And this has been a moment. I mean, we've been working hours and hours and weeks on this thing. So it's the time. And so we're both like adrenaline's pumping. We're excited. And he turns the key and it begins to fire up, but it sounds terrible. And all of a sudden, gas pumps out of the carburetor, smoke's coming out of the engine, all this smoke's coming out of the back of the car, and then all of a sudden, we have a 2-car garage. It backfires like no tomorrow, and we both jump, and Sam turns it off right away. And I'm like, what have I done? What have we done? I have no idea what's going on anymore. And so I thought, you know, somehow I ruined the engine because I had a water hose close to the block, and maybe I was like pouring it in the engine. I had no idea. I was like, okay, we're toast. So I decided to call my cousin, who is a professor at a college. He teaches automotive. And I told him the whole deal, and he said, you know, after he listened to everything, he said, hey, did you stab the distributor? It's like, what? Stab? What? He's like, yeah, you got to stab the distributor, find top dead center, get your piston one, you know, all the way. I'm like, I've never heard of this. So he goes on to explain this whole thing, how you put this thing in the proper way, then, you know, advance it, the whole thing. So I take all these notes. He gives me a ton of clarity. And then I put this in the way he said. We find top dead center. And the moment comes again, and I'm like, Sam fired it up. And he turns the key, and the engine roared. And we had put a new camshaft in, which meant the engine was like, whoa, you know, just this powerful thing. And it was such an awesome moment. Now, you may wonder, where are we going today? Which is a fair concern. So the reason I share this with you and talk about, my cousin giving me clarity when it came to distributor is not to give you clarity and the gift of clarity when it comes to distributor. But today I want to give you a gift that is far more important. I want to talk about the gift of clarity when it comes to being a man. And guys, I think this is so incredibly important. And today I want to give the gift of clarity when it comes to being a man, specifically to fathers and to men in the room. But guys, this is going to be applicable for all of us. This is going to be helpful for moms and dads. This is going to be helpful for wives and husbands. This is going to be helpful for young women and older women, young men and older men. This is helpful for every single one of us. Because clarity, what that does for you, clarity gives you security. Clarity gives you confidence. When it comes to clarity, clarity is the gift that allows you to feel empowered to move forward in life. And when it comes to what does it mean to be a man, this is such an important subject specifically for fathers. Because dads, here's the reality. At some point in time in your life, either directly or indirectly, your son is going to look at you and kind of bump into you and say, Dad, what does it mean to be a man? And he may not say it exactly that way or in those terms, but he's going to look to you. He's going to look to you to model it. He's going to look to you to answer those questions. And he's going to look to you your whole life. When he, gets married, maybe he's 25 or 30, and if that's part of his life, he's going to look to you and say, hey, Dad, I'm a young man. What does this look like now to be a man? And then he has kids. If he has kids, what does it look like to be a man now? Because I have no sleep, And then as he gets older, he's going to look to you as a father and go, what does it look like to get old well? Your son, he's going to look to you to answer the question, what's it mean to be a man? In fact, the research points to this over and over and over. Dr. Carol Gilligan, she's a professor at Harvard. She's got great research, and some of her research says this. It says at about 3 to 5 years of age, however, a lad gradually pulls away from his mom and sisters in an effort to formulate a masculine identity. It's the process known as disconnection and differentiation. Guys, this happens at the earliest stages before even their cognitive ability to connect the dots, to go, oh my gosh, there's just something inside of a little boy that's going, I don't know what this is, but there's something that's pulling me. There's something that's tugging me towards Dad. And Dad, can you begin to answer the questions? Can you begin to model what it looks like to be a man? Dad, I want to give you the gift of clarity, to know how to answer, to know how to meet your son. And dads, you also, I would imagine, have daughters. And your daughter perhaps one day is going to bring home a boy. Say, Dad, what do you think? Is this the guy for me? Man, I want to give you a gift of clarity, to have some confidence to go, this is the kind of man that's going to provide for you. This is the kind of man who's going to create respect and honor you. This is the kind of man who's going to discover you and love you and cherish you and value you his whole life. I want to give you that kind of grid. Guys, this is a gift for every single one of us, but specifically, I want to talk to men and I want to talk to fathers. And today I want to answer the question of what it means to be a man, not from our culture, not perhaps from what your granddaddy or grandfather taught you. Maybe there's going to be some overlap. Not from, hey, a man goes hunting and, all that kind of stuff. That's a fair discussion. That's another day at another time. Today, what I want to do is I want to give you clarity and give you a definition of what it means to be a man from what King David said. King David lived 3,000 years ago, and King David, when he was dying on his deathbed, he looked at his son Solomon, and he said something to his son Solomon that causes questions, and I want us to answer those questions. And as King David is on his deathbed, his son Solomon comes in, and he says to his son something so critically important. He says, son, I want you to be strong. And I want you to act like a man. What does that mean? Act like a man. What is Solomon supposed to take away? What is he supposed to think with this? How is this supposed to be inspirational and helpful to Solomon? Well, guys, today that's what I want us to talk about. And I want us to discover the answer to those questions. And to do that, what I want to do today is something a little bit different than what we've done. Today, what I want to do is I really want to compare and contrast two individuals, two men in the Bible. And these two men are going to be somewhat familiar to you, regardless if you're a Christian or not a Christian, grown up in church, not in church. I mean, these two men are fairly famous individuals. So who are these two men that we're going to compare and contrast today? Well, the Apostle Paul gives us insight in 1 Corinthians 15 on who these two men are. He starts this way. Here's the Apostle Paul, follower of Jesus, lived 2,000 years ago. He says, the first man was of the dust of the earth. Now, everybody reading this letter of Paul go, oh, I know who that is. Because everybody reading this letter, they were familiar with the letter of Genesis. The letter of Genesis is the first letter in the Bible, and the letter of Genesis starts this way. It says, in the beginning, God created, and God created them male and female. And in the beginning, that God created Adam out of the dust of the earth. So everyone reading goes, oh, I know who Paul's talking about. Paul's talking about this guy right here. Paul's talking about Adam, the first man. Well, that's our first man. But there's two men we're going to compare today. So Paul, what's the second man? Well, Paul goes on, and he gives us insight. He says the second man is from heaven. And again, everybody reading this letter knows who this man from heaven is because they're aware of John. John is one of the 12 disciples. John was the closest follower of Jesus. And John is an old man. When he wrote about Jesus, he wrote about the thing that all the other people knew in the first century. He said, Jesus was from heaven. So here we have our two men. There's Adam and there's Jesus. And guys, this is an important thing to understand because one man represents the old, one represents new. One man represents life-taking, the other man represents life-giving. Jesus said the words, I've come to give you life and give you life to the fullest. One man represents a failed masculinity, the other man represents success in masculinity. And here's why that's important. Because you as a man will knowingly or unknowingly take your masculinity from Adam or from Jesus. As a father, you will teach your sons, you will teach your daughters about masculinity and about men from Adam or from Jesus. And I think all of us together, if we're just talking, I think all of us together would go, I would much rather know. I would just much rather know which one I'm pulling masculinity from, Adam or from Jesus, because this has substantial repercussions and consequences. So today what I want to do is I want to give you that knowledge. Today I want to give a gift of a father, a gift I can give to a man or a father is a gift of clarity. It provides security and confidence. So what we're going to do, we're going to compare and contrast these two men on 4 very specific areas of life. And we're going to start with Adam. And so again, I alluded to that Adam is from the very beginning. When you look at the letter of Genesis, you read that in the beginning, God created the male and female, and he created Adam out of the dust of the earth. And in the beginning, when God created Adam and Eve, he put them in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, he put this thing. He put a tree. Now, a lot of us, this is a side note, a lot of us, or maybe you've heard this, a lot of people will say, it's an apple tree. Now, we don't know if it's an apple tree. There's really no biblical evidence to say it was an apple tree. It just was some sort of a fruit tree. Could have been an apple tree, but it was just a fruit tree. And the reason why God put a fruit tree in the Garden of Eden is really important to understand and explains a lot about God and the world that we see. And I don't have time to go into this in terms of, in depth, but in the very beginning, when God created the world, he created the best possible world he could have created. And, we can go through a lot of different worlds God could have created, but the best possible world that God could have created is the world we live in. It's a world with a capacity to love. Love is the supreme ethic. Love, to receive it and to give it, is the best thing known to humankind. John says God is love. In the very beginning, he created a world with a capacity to love. But love, by definition, requires a component of your will to be 100% free to choose to love or choose not to love. Because if I force you to love me, if I make you love me, by definition, it's no longer love. By definition, it's compliance. So in the very beginning, when God created the best possible world he could have created, a world with a capacity to love, God knew that he had to create humankind with a freedom of their soul that he will not violate to choose to love him or choose not to love him. Therefore, he put a tree in the Garden of Eden. And he gave him one rule, not 613 laws, one law. Adam, Eve, do not eat from the tree of good and evil. Trust me. Trust me. So what happened? Well, the story continues. And here's what we see happens. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. And guys, every time I read this verse, I think this is how temptation works. I think this is how temptation works for every single one of us. I mean, that we see something and it's desirable and it's pleasing and then we take it. I mean, really basic example. Sometimes when Jill goes to H-E-B, she buys a package of Oreo cookies. And that's like my kryptonite, right? And when she brings those Oreo cookies home and she puts them on the counter and I'm just walking by as an innocent man, right? That's the way I think about it. And I'm just walking by. I mean, I see the Oreo cookies and I'm like, they look desirable. They look pleasurable. And then what do? I take it. Not 1, but 10 with a cold glass of milk. It's fantastic, right? But my point, that's very simple. My point is in the most complex temptations or the simplest temptations. Regardless if you're a Christian or not, this is how it works. You see it, it looks desirable, pleasurable, and then we take. Now here's a side note that's so important. God has spoken on many subjects in our life. God is very clear on a lot of moral choices in our life. And God has spoken on the thou shalt and thou shalt not. He's spoken to those things not to oppress us, not to make us miserable and not happy. He actually wants to liberate us, give us freedom, help us become more alive than ever before. But I'm telling you, the opposite of what God has called us to do, you've experienced this oftentimes, looks so good, looks so pleasurable, looks desirable in the moment. That was true for Eve. God said, Eve, trust me. There's something on the other side of this temptation that is so good for you, that will grow you, liberate you, and free you. Trust me. But temptation was there. So she ate it. Now the question becomes, where's Adam? Because we're talking about Adam. Was Adam, picking flowers for a big old date night? Was Adam taking care of the kids? What was Adam doing? Well, we know. The scriptures tell us, and it's very clear. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her. And he ate it. He felt the same kind of temptation. This brings us to our first observation, and it has to do with one word: passivity. Passivity. Passivity by definition is saying, I'm not going to step up or step in, I'm going to step away. Passivity by definition is that feeling, and this is so important, lean in. It's that feeling you get, that feeling that says it's too hard, it's too much, it's too difficult. It's that feeling you get when you have an opportunity to step up and step in, but there's a bunch of friends around and it's going to come at a cost. I don't know. I feel the pressure. It's that voice in your head that when you're faced with what God has spoken, it's clear that all of a sudden there's that passivity right there that says, did God really say that? Doesn't God want you to be happy? Don't you want you to be happy? Everybody's doing it. It's not a big deal. It's just this one time. God's going to forgive you anyways. All of that, if you could capture it in a word, that is passivity. And here's the deal, guys. This is so helpful. Almost every time you're faced with doing the right thing, and when I say right thing, I'm saying the thing God has spoken to. Almost every time, do you know what goes hand in hand with choosing the right thing? Is passivity's right there. God, here's what I know you've called me to. God, here's what I know you've spoken to. And all of a sudden, what's right there with you is passivity. Did God really say that? Did God really say not to eat from the fruit of the tree? I mean, really? It's too hard. It's too much. It's too difficult. That's what Adam felt. So what did Adam do with that? Well, it brings us to our first observation with Adam, is that Adam gave in to that passivity. He embraced it. He didn't step in. He didn't step up. Adam stepped away in that opportunity. So there's two men. There's Adam, but we also have Jesus. And guys, Jesus faced a very similar dilemma. And do you know what Jesus faced? He faced this: sin. Sin. John says Jesus is from heaven. Jesus looks at the world and he sees the world and he sees sin is everywhere, from Adam and Eve to every single person since. In fact, the Apostle Paul was very clear on this. In the letter of Romans, he writes this statement. He says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The glory of God is perfection. The standard to have peace with God is perfection. The standard to get into heaven is perfection. The standard to be forgiven is perfection. And Paul makes the point, not one of us have met that standard. All of us, even the good, even if you sell every or give every pair of shoes you've ever had, even if you give all your money to the poor, it doesn't matter. You have fallen short of the standard, which is perfection. And that's your only way to have a right standing and be in heaven with God. Jesus sees the whole world, that we have used our God-given freedom, the capacity of our will to choose the opposite of what God's called us to do. By definition, sin. So Jesus does something different. John says, for God so loved the world that he sent his one and only son, that Jesus comes in to live a perfect life that you and I can't live. And Jesus had to live a perfect life to be a perfect sacrifice. And Jesus had to be a perfect sacrifice to satisfy the perfect standard of God, the perfect judgment of God for your sin and for my sin. And the moment we come to the place in our life to say, I'm so exhausted from trying to be my functional Savior, I'm so tired of trying to make God happy. I'm so tired of trying to earn my eternity and say, God, you're just happy with me. The moment we get done with that, we're like, no more of that. I'm done being my functional Savior. And you put your trust, your faith, your confidence in the person of Jesus Christ. The moment you do that, you are forgiven, past, present, future. Your sin has been paid in full, which means God sees you as righteous, as perfect, that you have a right standing with God, that you're forgiven, and that your eternity is secure. All of that Jesus came to do. Now, the question becomes, what about passivity? Jesus, did you feel this? Were you tempted in the same ways that Adam was? Well, the scriptures say that Jesus was tempted in every way you and I have been tempted. Well, of course he was. And we see this highlighted, Jesus fighting this voice of passivity in the Garden of Gethsemane. Hours before he was about to be crucified, Jesus prays this prayer and gives us such insight. He says, Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me. God, this seems too hard, too big, too much, too difficult. God, take this from me if there's any other way. Man, I do not want to go forward with this. What does Jesus do? Yet not my will, but yours be done. God, I trust you. I trust you are working all things for the good. Which gives us a distinct comparison that Jesus, when it came to passivity, he rejected passivity. That he stepped up and that he stepped in. He didn't step away in his moment. That's our first observation. But our second observation has to do with another word. Has to do with responsibility. And guys, when it comes to responsibility, here's the thing you got to know. If you search the scriptures from beginning to end, you will find three responsibilities every man has been given. And the three responsibilities are a will to obey, a work to do, and a woman to love. When it came to Adam, he was given those three responsibilities. A will to obey God's will. Don't eat from the tree in the garden. A work to do, take care of the garden. A woman to love, that was Eve, his wife. When it came to Jesus, he was given those three responsibilities as well. A will to obey, die on the cross. A work to do, live a perfect life, because they can't live a perfect life. A woman to love, well, Jesus never got married, but Jesus elevated the value of women. He honored women. He respected women. And ultimately, Jesus says, my bride is the church. I will give my life for the church, which he calls his bride. The church in every generation is the catalyst to share the incredible news that you can have peace with God through the person of Jesus Christ. Every man is given these three responsibilities. So, again, in observation, what did Adam do with these responsibilities? Well, Adam, he rejected those responsibilities he was given by God. When it comes to Jesus, what did he do with those three responsibilities? Jesus accepted those responsibilities. Now, let me just pause again a second and remind you what I said earlier. Guys, you will knowingly or unknowingly take your cues about masculinity from Adam or from Jesus. You will knowingly or unknowingly teach your children about masculinity from Adam or from Jesus. This is such an important conversation. So we have passivity, we have responsibility, and then the third observation is with this word, leadership. Leadership. Now this week I was on Google, and sometimes that's a dangerous thing to do, but I was looking up leadership. And I discovered there are over 850 definitions to leadership. So talk about a term you're like, where do I go with this one? So I was reading several different definitions and just thinking about leadership in general. And I came across this individual by the name of Susan Matza. She's a leadership guru. She's got leadership blogs. And I loved her definition of leadership. I think it captures what leadership is all about. She said this: leadership is speaking up, stepping up, and standing up to make a difference in someone or something that matters to you and makes a difference for others. I love that. Leadership. Speaking up, stepping up, standing up, making a difference in someone that matters. Adam, he had the opportunity to step up, to speak up, to stand up, to make a difference in his marriage, to make a difference in the most important relationship outside of his heavenly Father. What did Adam do? He didn't speak up. He didn't step up. He didn't step in. By definition, that is called a coward. And so, if you were to compare Jesus and Adam, you would say Adam leads cowardly. But then you look at Jesus, and Jesus faced the same kind of dilemma. Jesus faced the same kind of tension. And we see Jesus make an observation that he stepped up, that he stepped in, that he spoke up because you matter to him, I matter to him, and he did something. And by definition, that would be called courage. Courage. In fact, there are all kinds of courageous moments in the life of Jesus, but one of my favorite moments in the life of Jesus comes in the Garden of Gethsemane right after he fought with passivity and rejected passivity. He prays, he gets up, his disciples are sleeping, he looks off in the distance. There's an army, a mob of individuals with swords coming to arrest him. He knows what's about to go down. And in that tradition and in that culture, when a mob is coming to get you, you run, you hide, you get away. That was the standard. And they come, here's the whole army. They come and they say, we're here for Jesus, which means we're here to take his life. What does Jesus do in that moment? It says, Jesus steps up and he says, I am he. I'm he. I'm here to give my life. I'm here to do something significant for something that matters to me. The crowd was so shocked. Those guys, the soldiers, they all kind of fell back to the ground. They had not seen this kind of courage before. So when you look at Jesus and you compare him to Adam, Jesus leads courageously. And our last observation has to do with reward. Adam stood there in that moment with a tree, and he had so much reward before him. He had the opportunity to reward his marriage by stepping in, stepping up, speaking up, and saying, hey, sweetie, we're not going to do that. That is not good for us. That's not good for our relationship. I'm going to step in here. He could have done that. That would have infused trust and rewarded his marriage. He had the opportunity with his kids one day to go, hey, Dad, tell me about that time that you and Mom were standing before the tree and you faced that enormous amount of passivity and all the voice. How'd you handle that? Can you teach us? Can you talk to us about that moment? He had the reward of legacy with his children. Adam had the reward of looking at himself in the mirror with freedom, looking at himself in the mirror and being able to speak with authority. Because he knows he had faced the gauntlet, he had faced passivity, he had rejected it, and he doesn't have to take those secrets and skeletons to bed with him. He could stand with freedom. He had that reward before him. But in the midst of his temptation, Adam, he lost sight of the reward. He gets short-sighted. All he can see is the pleasure. All he can see is the moment. All he could see is the instant gratification in that moment. And he loses sight of his reward. You compare that with Jesus? Jesus saw it clearly as well. Jesus had the incredible reward of being faithful to the Father. Jesus had the incredible reward of being faithful as a man. Jesus had the reward of you and you and you saying, one day I can be in relationship with you. You can have peace. You can spend eternity with me. All of that is possible, and it hangs in the balance. The difference is Jesus didn't lose sight of his reward. Jesus expects a reward. It was the motivator. It was the thing he kept front and center and said, this is the story I want to tell. And it motivated him to reject passivity and to step up and be a courageous leader. So, With all of that, that's a lot of information. With all of that, let's circle back to our question. David, on his deathbed, says some of the most important words to his son. He says, be strong. Act like a man. Dad, what does it mean to act like a man? It means to reject passivity. It means to accept responsibility. It means to lead courageously. And it means to expect a great reward. That's clarity. That can provide us security. That can provide us confidence and a way forward. And guys, here's what's so important. I'm not saying go home today and feel like crap about yourself. That's not the idea here. This is simply a grid. This is something I've known for years and years, and I've taught my sons, and man, I have failed so many times at this. But God's grace and his love is far big enough to handle my failure. But I can get up every single day as well as you can, with clarity, with knowing how to move forward. And this is much more of a grid. This is much more of a foundation for every arena of life, for morality, for your marriage, for parenting, for whatever arena, you pick it. I mean, just think of it real quick. In terms of temptation, we all face different temptations. You're going to face a temptation perhaps tomorrow. Well, now you have a grid. So next time you face temptation and you begin to hear that voice, and that voice is saying, hey, just give in. Did God really say that? Hey, doesn't God want you to be happy? Come on, give in, give in, give in. You can go, oh, I know what that is. Now you have clarity. That's passivity. That's the voice of passivity. Calling my name. You know what I'm called to do? I'm called to reject it and accept that God-given responsibility. One of the God-given responsibilities is a will to obey. God has spoken on this. He's been very clear on this. Okay, that's tough. Man, that voice is still there. But now I have an option to lead courageously. Step up, step in, speak up, because something matters to me. And when you say no to that temptation, there is a reward. You can go to bed at night. I promise you will sleep better at night. You will feel better and more free as a man. This is how the grid can work for you. Same thing in relationships. I mean, I think one of the hardest things for me to do, maybe for you as a man, is to say I'm sorry. I don't want to say I'm sorry. I want to say it's your fault. It's her fault. Hey, just change. If you would just, I don't want to own my piece of the pie. I mean, I'm going to feel inadequate then. One of the greatest things you can do is own your piece of the pie. And next time there's an opportunity with your son, your daughter, your wife, whatever it may be, you have a grid. You know what? I don't feel like it. Well, every man feels that. That's passivity. I can reject it. My responsibility is a woman to love. I can do something to move in, even though it's difficult, and draw trust and closeness and intimacy. I have an opportunity to lead courageously. Step up, step in. Man, it's going to come at a cost. I'm going to own my piece of the pie. And when you do and say, hey, sweetie, I'm sorry. Here's what I've done. I know this is the way it made you feel. Here's what I'm going to do different next time, because I don't want to repeat the hurt on the other side of me. It's no guarantee, but it certainly can help you build trust in that relationship. This is a grid. This is clarity to provide security and confidence. And if we're willing to do this and step up and step in, let me just tell you, there's reward for you and reward for those around you. You will know God in a richer and deeper way. The more you honor him with your life, the more you see, the more you hear, the closer you feel with your Heavenly Father. You will sleep better at night. You're not bringing a bunch of skeletons in your closet. You're not carrying the energy of secrets. Your marriage will be stronger because it's a deposit after another of trust. Yes, it's hard, but you rejected passivity. Your children will have more confidence and security because you have clarity on what it means to be a man. You have clarity on the difference between the two men. And when your daughter says, hey, Dad, here's this guy, what do you think? Well, now you have a grid. And you say, hey, sweetie, I know 6'2" and a lot of money and that secure job can feel great, but can we have a different kind of conversation? Not only that, but your legacy will be powerful. This is hard as all get out. It's not about perfection. It's about perseverance. It's about persistence. And not only will it benefit you, but I'll leave you with this. It'll benefit those around. Women will be respected and protected. And good Lord, do we need that in our culture. You know what else? People will be valued. Jesus gave his life for the value of people. We are called to follow him. wives will be cherished, families will be sacred, and God will ultimately be known. One of my favorite quotes of all time comes from an old preacher by the name of Gypsy Smith. He says, there are 5 gospels. Gospel is a letter about the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and you. And most people, they will never read the first 4. They're going to read your life. And today, one of the greatest gifts I believe I could give every father, every man, every mother, every young woman, every old woman, every young man, every old man, is the gift of clarity on what it means to be a man. A man rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects a great reward. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much that we can pause in these moments and have these conversations that are not simple. And Father, there's many, many layers to this whole conversation, but you know that best. You know the hearts, you know the minds, you know all of us well. You know what we walked into the room with, you know what we're feeling now. So God, with what has been presented, I just ask that you take this, that you use it to grow us, to allow us to experience you at a greater level. And God, that you give us the courage to trust you with this. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.